In Trial of the Ancestors, there are 16 new Atlas passive keystones, and these interact with the League mechanics you know and love, or maybe know and hate, in a variety of interesting ways. For example, some of the new keystones modify League mechanics to remove their timer, if you ever felt like the time pressure of Legion or Delirium was simply uncomfortable, or you liked that it sometimes popped up in your maps, but you couldn't quite do it on your build yet. Depending on how the rest of your Atlas is spec'd, this could be an option to consider. Now others completely change how you interact with a mechanic. For example, when it comes to Torment, normally the ghost possesses nearby enemies, and then you have to kill it for loot. But you become the loot goblin that the ghost possesses, and enemies try to kill you with the Atlas passive keystone. And on the other hand, others just simplify things a little bit. For example, if you don't want to read and optimally place remnants, then just take the big boom. You'll hit most stuff. You will still have to do a little reading, at least to double check and make sure that you aren't hitting immunities or anything that bricks your build. Aside of that though, you're good to go, and you get a whole bunch of monsters almost immediately. And so today I wanted to look at all 16 keystones, since they were revealed in the patch notes and now we have some trees to look at them, and talk about some of my thoughts. First up we have All Hands. Your maps have a 40% chance to contain a random master, and in exchange, you don't get master missions when the map's completed, but any modifiers that grant an additional chance instead cause the master to be found at 150% of a value. Which means if you like encountering masters randomly in your maps, this is a good way to do it, and it sort of takes the decision out of your hands. You'll encounter more masters, but have less control over which ones you find. I'm also kind of curious if with All Hands, this makes master missions count as extra content. It kind of goes back to the original way masters were handled in Path of Exile, where you'd encounter Verici and randomly do his mission. Or more accurately, you'd encounter Elrion and skip his mission because it was terrible. But hey, in good news, the only time you encounter Elrion, Verici, or Haku is when they're trying to smash your face in. Next up we have Timeless Conflict. Legion encounters in your map have no timer, but breaking out monsters and chests that are in stasis progressively cause a schism. Legion encounters begin once a schism has occurred. So, instead of having a fixed amount of time to break out everything, you now have a fixed progress bar. And it's already been confirmed that generals, sergeants, and chests will be worth more. This means one of two things. Now let's say you're going for a Legion strategy involving Emblematic, a chance for splinters to drop as emblems instead. All you really care about is splinter drops, which primarily come from generals, sergeants, and chests. Therefore, you wouldn't really worry about breaking everything else out, thus this could increase your profits. Alternatively, you can get quite a lot of rewards from Chain of Command, especially when you stack it with other things that modify your rewards, and you wouldn't need to worry about something like Protracted Battle anymore, because it doesn't matter how long it lasts. These are all things that could be valuable with Timeless Conflict. Or maybe you're an SSF and you just can't kill the Legion yet. Do I think this is going to be the optimal way to farm Legion? No, but I think it's going to be viable, and it adds more strategies. Next up we have Extreme Archaeology, which not only do I think it's going to be viable, but I think it's going to be great. The increased explosion radius means that it's going to cover a significant portion of the screen. The placement range means you can put it pretty much anywhere you want the boom to go off, preferably in the middle of a group, and it works particularly well for compact expeditions, meaning in a Crimson Temple it's not going to be great, but in a Dunes it'll be fine. And the monsters spawn with 10% of your life missing, which isn't bad unless you have some sort of damage bonus to monsters that are on full life, but number of explosives is 1. This does a couple things. First up, if you just like going fast, this is a great way to make your expeditions go faster. Second of all, if you're a new player and you don't want to really have the complexity of setting up a proper explosion chain to min-max, now you don't have to. And last but not least, all of the effects are applied immediately to all of the monsters, meaning if you're able to do a wide variety of remnants, especially if you're able to do all of them, say you're a Trinity build that does multi-elemental damage, well, then you're in for a real treat. Because you can just let a big boom go off and reap the rewards. I do think with Extreme Archaeology, your expeditions will on average be more rewarding than they were in the past, making this a very powerful node and one well worth considering. On the other hand, crop rotation is going to take a lot more investment. Harvest crops are only tier 1 plants, the lowest tier, but harvesting crops in your maps has a chance to upgrade the tier of plants of different colors. Try to say that 3 times fast. You probably won't be able to, or at the very least I had a couple takes for this. I think crop rotation could work very well with some sort of wandering path strategy. a way to get a whole bunch of monsters and hopefully upgrade the tiers decently. But if you don't invest into it, it's going to feel very lackluster. And so I would use this one with caution. If you know what you're doing and want to go after a specific strategy in Harvest where you think you're reliably going to be able to upgrade the plants, then that might not be a bad thing. But if you're only going to be getting the tier 1s, it's not so great. And harvesting crops in your maps makes me think the more plots you have, the better. So when you harvest the first one, it has a chance to upgrade everything else. And this also means you're going to have to plan out your harvest. If you have blue-purple in the first plot, and then yellow-purple, and then blue-purple again, well, you want to start with a yellow plot, because that way you can upgrade the blue and purple plants. And then you'll want to do one and harvest the other afterwards. It leads to something that is actually the opposite of a lot of the other keystones. They simplify mechanics. This one makes it more complicated. That said, if you fully invest into it, this could be incredibly rewarding. Possibly the most rewarding way to interact with Harvest outside of just going with an Atlas memory. Then we have Lucid Dream, which is kind of a wild card, because Val's side areas weren't all that impressive before. But for getting more than just a facelift, they've pretty much gotten an entire rework and are their own league mechanic now. So I'm probably going to experiment with Lucid Dream, since, worst case, it should be a good way to get an early 6th link. And at best, it could genuinely be a really interesting way to farm in the future. Vol side areas in your maps are no longer corrupted, meaning you can scour them, alch them, transmute them, or chance them. And yes, GGG has already confirmed there are unique Vol side areas. I'm hoping they're going to be something that's crazy awesome and gives a ton of loot. But we only know what Vol side areas are right now, not what they will be in the future. On the other hand, if you like fighting bosses, Destructive Play gives you more of them. The Maven summons 1 to 3 additional bosses when witnessing map bosses, and modifiers to the final boss in each map also apply to these summoned bosses, which is really interesting because there's a lot of rewards that say the final map boss drops. The final map boss has increased loot. This is a way to make your bosses significantly more rewarding in exchange for making them more dangerous. I also wonder, does this mean you can witness 4 map bosses in your map, thus supercharging your Maven and allowing you to farm Awakened Gems? I don't know if I'm going to be playing a bosser, but if I am, I'm definitely going to test this. And if I end up playing a bosser and testing it, I'll be talking about that money-making strategy. Assuming it actually makes money, of course. So get subscribed if that sounds interesting to you. Of course, if you prefer Ritual, we have Immutable Dogma. Cannot reroll favors, but monsters sacrificed have 100% more tribute. Essentially, you only get one inventory, but you get to buy anything. This goes back into the category of simplifying mechanics. It's going to be really easy for a new player to spec into Immutable Dogma, just buy everything and have a pretty good time without having to worry about some of the nuance that Ritual normally entails, especially around when to reroll. Now, is this going to be optimal? Like a lot of the simplification mechanics, and like a lot of the timer removal ones, for most people, probably not. But if you're not doing the main mechanic optimally, it could very well be. Then there's Meticulous Appraiser. Modifiers to quantity of items found in your maps instead apply to rarity of items found in your maps at 300% of their value. I don't know what to make of this one, because I don't magic find. So, if you magic find, let me know down in the comments if Meticulous Appraiser is good, bad, or needs testing. I think conceptually it's very cool to be able to sacrifice item quantity for better item quality, something that you usually don't get to do in Path of Exile, but GGG has discussed supporting in the past. In practice, though, isn't quantity better because you can just get more rarity elsewhere? I don't know, and I'd definitely like to find out, but I don't want to play a Magic Finder. In fact, there's a lot of things that I'd rather do instead of play a Magic Finder. Speaking of, I have to go do one of them right now, because I have to talk about Speaker of the Dead. Yeah, Tormented Spirits possess you instead of monsters, and you are able to touch nearby monsters to increase their loot and give them buffs. I kind of wonder what sort of crazy builds people are going to make with Speaker of the Dead. You get a bunch of ghosts, absorb them, and you become the thing that's blasting across the map. In some ways, this feels like the poor man's Headhunter node. Let's just put all the potential farming value aside, which, to be fair, I think there's a lot of value in farming. But I also think it's just a really cool node conceptually that could be super fun to play. You get to run around summoning tornadoes, touching monsters, making them more dangerous, and exploding them for loot. Now earlier, there was a Maven node that allowed you to fight more bosses, but if you hate fighting bosses, you can spec into Endless Tide. Beyond portals in your maps cannot spawn unique bosses, and beyond portals in your maps have 50% less merging radius. This means it's going to be a lot harder to trigger beyond. You're going to need a super juicy map. A map that's too juicy even for Einhar. And you're probably giving up a vast majority of your tainted currency drops. Even before the changes in 3.22, currency drops tended to come mostly from the bosses. At least the tainted currency did. But if you're magic finding, or doing a kill a bunch of monsters strategy, Endless Tide could be very effective nonetheless. I'm just not quite sure how the 50% less merging radius will play out. It could be that's too steep of a penalty. Now most exiles like killing monsters, but if you don't like killing monsters, consider Cassia's Pride. Blight monsters in your maps take less damage from players and their minions, in exchange for Blight towers dealing significantly more damage. In this case, the Blight tower defense minigame really does become a tower defense minigame, instead of you role-playing as the tower. Number one, if your build's pretty weak and you can't do the job of clearing all the monsters by yourself, then this is great, making it an excellent early league pick for anyone who wants to farm Blight. As Blight towers are quite powerful, players just end up outscaling them. And on the other hand, if the thought of role-playing as a tower gives you anxiety, this could be a pretty good pickup as well, because now you don't have to. Just keep in mind that your tower strategy is actually going to be very relevant, and if you build the wrong ones or don't pay attention to lanes, you could very well fail. Your own damage, 25% of your damage when you're a fully juiced, fully geared endgame build will still probably explode anything that's not a boss. And if you have a really juiced, like you're wearing a Mage Blood build, you'll probably explode a boss. But at that point, I don't know why you'd have Cassia's Pride. If you like gambling, there's Arbitrary Tenents. Favor at ritual altars in your maps randomly costs between 90% less and 80% more. Imagine getting a mirror that costs 90% less. Pretty awesome, right? Now imagine getting a mirror that costs 80% more, and you can't afford to do anything with it. That would be pretty bad. I don't know enough about the favor costs to know if that situation will actually arise, but I absolutely hope it does, and look forward to the salty Twitch clip when it actually happens. I don't think Arbitrary Tenants is necessarily that good. It does, on average, slightly reduce the cost, but for randomness is going to make the whole experience feel pretty unpleasant, so I'd avoid it personally. Then again, maybe that's just me being risk-averse. Now, Unending Nightmare both removes the timer from Delirium and also modifies its behavior, because Delirium Fog never dissipates, but you can't get orbs or splinters, which on its face makes it much less rewarding. And if you are a Delirium build, it's much less rewarding. If you're in a map that's ideal for Delirium, it's also much less rewarding. But if you're in a situation where you couldn't do Delirium well anyway, either due to the map layout you're farming, or because your build simply can't keep up with a timer, this could be worth taking, especially if you need to farm cluster jewels or want to add a bunch of monsters to your maps. Much like the Beyond one, you shift the mechanic from, I'm farming it for the rewards from this mechanic, to, I'm farming it to have extra monsters in your map because I enjoy killing monsters. We've also seen a significant rework of the shaping nodes, and 3 new keystones added near the center of a tree. First up, Bold Undertaking. Fortune Favors the Brave applies an additional option, but 100% more cost for Fortune Favors the Brave. So instead of applying 1 random league mechanic for 3C, it applies 2 for 6C, and I would imagine it can't choose the same one twice. So the additional option means you might get Harbinger with Legion, might mean you get Essence with Harbinger, or you get Delirium with Ritual, which could actually be pretty economical for 6 Chaos. I don't know if this is good, especially since we're now losing the pack size from Fortune Favors the Brave, but if it can double up, that would be pretty neat. And even if it can't, I'm assuming the more conservative option here, then I do think it's something that some people will take, because especially in solo self-found, it's a very cost-efficient way to get access to extra league mechanics. Overloaded Circuit is another really cool option that needs some testing. League mechanic crafting options choose 3 random notable passives associated with that league and treat them as allocated, with 100% more cost of map crafting options. Question 1. If you use Fortune Favors the Brave, do you get this applied? Number 2. If you already have the Atlas passives, do they double up? And number 3, if not, what happens when you have some, but not all of the Atlas passives allocated? Can you essentially use this as a thread of hope, taking 3 notables associated with a mechanic and getting the other 3 for, well, a few chaos? Also, what happens with Essence, where it only has 4 notables? Do you get 3 of them automatically applied? If so, that's going to make Essence a really interesting farming option. Yeah, you spend 4C instead of 2, but that's relatively cheap, and you get all the bonuses with none of a point cost. This is something that I'm absolutely going to be testing, and if you're interested at all, do be sure to get subscribed. Maybe leave a like while you're down there. And then finally, we have the 7th gate. All possible League map crafting options are available, while 6 gateways are allocated. The gateways are the nodes over on the sides of a tree, something like the Mortal Gateway. But what does the 7th gate actually do? Does it mean you get every League crafting option that's available? Does it mean you don't have to progress your Atlas to get the options? Or does it unlock all the truly insane things like Infused Harbinger or Monstrous Treasure? And if so, how much of it is going to cost? Because I can't imagine they're cheap. This one feels like it could be an incredible thing where GGG just went wild, or it could end up being really mediocre if all it does is mean you get access to everything before you've completed your Atlas. Because most people are just going to complete their Atlas and go, okay, but I don't need the 7th gate. That said, if it gives all the League mechanics, from now on, we're going to have all the League mechanics available, and that's going to be absolutely massive for farming strategies and consistency. Number 1, it means you have more farming options, so if whatever you usually do is getting overfarmed, switch to something else. It also means that if there's something you enjoy farming, which most people don't, like let's just say you're a heist lover, then you can farm heist a little bit more efficiently because it's effectively on the Atlas. Though it also depends on prices and so much more. This is a huge unknown, but it's really interesting, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the testing. So those are the 60 new Atlas passive keystones coming in Trial of the Ancestors. If you want to look over any of these keystone passives for yourself, or the Atlas tree, maybe you want to make a farming strategy, then you can head over to the Atlas Passive Tree Planner at MaxwellGG. Right now, it does default to patch 3.21, since technically that's the current patch everyone's on, but if you just click the little blue arrow next to patch 3.21, you'll be able to set it to patch 3.22 no problem. And so now I'm curious, after looking at all the different Atlas passives, what farming strategies are you excited for in the upcoming league, and which keystones do you plan to use? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. Now, if you're looking for more content, I recently talked about how my 3.20 and 3.21 league starters went, because most of the things from those builds still apply. I also went over some ARPG news, including Diablo 3's biggest season ever, the new season for Torchlight Infinite, and the announcement of Titan Quest 2. And if it's more Path of Exile news you want, it's more Path of Exile news I've got. I'll link to all of that down below. Before I go, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for their continued support. Link to that is also in the description. But for now, thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you again sometime soon.